So if you just run the basic math, you will likely earn over $2 million in your lifetime. And if you're, a reasonably successful professional, it might even be 3 or 4 million.
Right, which is a staggering amount of money when you think about it.
It really is. And that money, it will flow right through your hands month by month, year by year. And yet, if you are anything like the average person, you will probably spend more time this year planning a single week-long vacation than you will spend planning how to capture, protect, and grow that multi-million-dollar river of wealth.
Yeah, it is honestly one of the greatest paradoxes of modern life. We spend 40, sometimes 50 hours a week trading our time and our energy for capital. But the moment we receive it,
we just sort of ignore it.
Exactly. We abdicate the responsibility of understanding how that capital actually functions within the broader economic system.
Right. Which brings us to the exact mission for today's deep dive into the source material. We've got a really fascinating stack of notes today. The core material is actually a comprehensive transcript from the Learning English podcast.
Yeah, and on its surface, it is designed as a lesson in personal finance vocabulary for non-native speakers.
Right, but when you actually read through the terms and the concepts they are trying to teach, it's not just a vocabulary list. It is a masterclass in the complex, highly specific, and let's be honest, often intimidating systems of American finance.
It really is. The material basically functions as a blueprint for the entire life cycle of wealth. Because mastering the terminology isn't just about, passing a spelling test. It is about grasping the underlying mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you don't understand the exact legal difference between a beneficiary and a dependent, or the mathematical difference between term and whole life insurance, the financial industry will simply make those decisions for you.
Right, and they're not going to make them in your favor.
Definitely not. I assure you, the decisions the industry makes on your behalf will be completely designed to enrich them, not you.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this blueprint. So we're going to explore how to build a defensive moat around your assets, how to navigate the inevitable macroeconomic forces that are, constantly trying to erode your purchasing power, and how to defend against the psychological blind spots that cause incredibly smart people to make just catastrophic money decisions.
It's a huge landscape to cover.
It is. And I want to start right at the bedrock. Before we even entertain the idea of compounding interest or stock options, we have to talk about the absolute worst case scenarios, like death and disaster.
Well, it is the only logical starting point, really. Yet it is the one area human beings are psychologically hardwired to just ignore. The material actually highlights the phrasal verb put off, and there's a profound behavioral economics lesson hidden right in that simple phrase.
Right, because we put off estate planning and life insurance because, contemplating our own mortality triggers an immediate visceral stress response.
Exactly. Our brains literally prefer to focus on the immediate dopamine hit of, say, a minor online purchase rather than the existential dread of planning for our own absence.
Yeah, no one wants to sit at their kitchen table on a Tuesday evening and run a spreadsheet on how their family survives if they get hit by a bus.
No, of course not. But the material frames this not around you, but around your dependents.
Right, and legally a dependent isn't just, someone you love.
No, legally and financially, a dependent is a highly specific designation. It is someone who relies on you for the majority of their financial support.
So mostly kids.
Usually minor children, yes. But it can easily be a spouse who has stepped out of the workforce to manage the household, or, an aging parent whose medical bills and housing you are subsidizing.
Oh, that makes sense.
And when you file your tax returns, claiming dependents fundamentally alters your tax liability because the government recognizes that your income is literally sustaining multiple lives.
Which means if that income suddenly vanishes, multiple lives are totally destabilized. So the defensive mechanism here is life insurance. You buy a policy, and if you die, the money goes to your beneficiaries.
Like the people you have legally designated on the document to receive the death benefit.
Right. But as soon as you step into the marketplace to buy this protection, you hit this massive, confusing fork in the road. You have to choose between term life insurance and whole life insurance. And I know a lot of people who just freeze at this decision and they just end up buying nothing.
And that paralysis is exactly what the complexity of the financial industry often induces. Let's break down the mechanics, because they operate on completely different philosophies.
Okay.
Term life insurance is pure, unadulterated risk mitigation. You are buying a policy for a highly specific term, typically 10, 20, or 30 years.
And you just pay a set premium every month.
Exactly. And if you pass away during, say, year 14, your beneficiaries receive the full death benefit, tax-free.
Okay, but if I buy a 30-year term policy when I'm 30 and I live to be 61, the term expires. I don't get a single dollar of those premiums back, right? It feels like I'm throwing money into a black hole. It's just gone.
I hear that all the time. Yes, but you have to shift your perspective on what you actually purchased. You didn't purchase an investment. You purchased a transfer of risk.
Oh, interesting. Like car insurance.
It is identical to the mechanics of auto insurance or homeowners insurance. You don't get to the end of the year, realize your house didn't burn down, and then demand your premiums back.
Right. That would be ridiculous.
You paid for the guarantee that if it burned down, you wouldn't be bankrupt. Term life is incredibly cheap because the insurance company employs actuaries who calculate that you are highly likely to outlive the term.
So they are betting you live, and you are hedging against the catastrophic financial fallout if you don't.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes mathematical sense. But then you have whole life insurance. And I mean, the pitch for whole life sounds amazing. It covers you until the day you die, whether that's at 40 or 104.
Yes, it guarantees a payout.
Right. And it includes a cash value component. So like a portion of my premium goes into this bucket that grows over time, which I can borrow against.
It sounds appealing because it preys on that exact feeling you just mentioned, the desire not to throw money away. Whole life bundles an insurance product with a savings or investment product.
Okay.
But whenever you bundle financial products, you introduce opacity. You lose transparency.
Yeah, I have to push back on the whole concept of whole life. To me, it just sounds like a forced savings account attached to a tragedy.
That's a very accurate way to look at it.
And because it's guaranteed to pay out eventually, since, everyone dies, the premiums are exponentially higher. A policy that cost me $50 a month in term life might cost me like $500 a month in whole life? Why on earth would I lock up that much of my monthly cash flow in something so complex? Is it actually worth it?
For the vast, vast majority of the population, the answer is a definitive no. And the source material aligns perfectly with your skepticism here.
Really?
Yeah. The fundamental flaw with whole life for the average earner is the opportunity cost. Because the premium is so exorbitant, you are tying up capital that could be deployed far more efficiently elsewhere.
So the returns aren't even that good.
Exactly. The underlying returns on the cash value portion of a whole life policy are notoriously low compared to historical stock market returns. Furthermore, the fee structure and the commissions paid to the agent selling you the policy are massive. They often consume the entirety of your first year's premiums.
Wow. So the agent has a massive financial incentive to push the more expensive, complex product on you.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the core strategy highlighted in the material. Buy term and invest the difference.
Okay, let's unpack this.
It is one of the most elegant, mathematically sound principles in personal finance. Let's use your exact numbers. If whole life costs $500 a month and term costs $50 a month, you buy the term policy.
So I instantly secure the exact same multi-million-dollar death benefit to protect my family, but for way cheaper.
Right. But then you take the remaining $450 every single month and you invest it yourself in a broad, low-cost index fund in the market.
Oh, I see. You are unbundling the insurance from the investment. You manage the investment part yourself.
Precisely. And if you invest $450 a month at an average historical return for 30 years, you are going to build a portfolio worth hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That's incredible.
So at age 60, when your term policy finally expires, it doesn't matter that you no longer have life insurance because you are now self-insured. You have built a massive pile of liquid wealth that you completely control with no opaque insurance fees eating away at it.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so that is the mechanical reality of protecting future income. But what about the assets you've already accumulated? The house, the bank accounts, the investments. The material dives into estate planning next.
Yes, and it immediately targets a very specific, dangerous misconception. The idea that estate planning is exclusively for the ultra-wealthy.
Right, because people hear the word estate and they picture like a sprawling mansion in the English countryside.
Exactly. But in the eyes of the law, your estate is simply the net sum of everything you own: your car, your checking account, your furniture, your retirement funds, minus everything you owe.
So if you own a smartphone and have $300 in a checking account, you have an estate.
You do. And if you don't dictate how that estate is handled, the state government will do it for you.
Yeah, the legal term for dying without a will is dying intestate. And the material paints this as absolute chaos. But practically, how bad is it? If I die without a will, doesn't my stuff just automatically go to my closest family?
It goes to who the state legislature defines as your closest family, according to a really rigid mathematical formula of bloodline succession that varies from state to state.
Oh, so it's not based on who you actually care about.
Not at all. It completely removes human nuance from the equation. Let's look at the real-world friction here. Let's say you have a life partner you've been with for 20 years, but you never legally married.
Okay.
If you die intestate, in many jurisdictions, that partner gets absolutely nothing, zero. The state will bypass them completely and hand your entire estate to your estranged parents or, a distant sibling you haven't spoken to in a decade.
That is terrifying. It essentially allows the government to write your final chapter, completely ignoring all your actual wishes and relationships. Yeah. So the absolute baseline defense is a will. But the material also introduces a more robust mechanism, right? A trust. Now, I understand that a will is a document saying who gets what, but I've always heard that trusts are incredibly expensive to set up. You're paying lawyers thousands of dollars up front.
It can be, yes.
For a middle-class family, aren't they just trading court fees later for lawyer fees today? Why go through the hassle?
It is a phenomenal question about the friction of cost. To understand why a trust is often vastly superior to a simple will, we have to look at the mechanism of what happens when a will is executed.
Okay, what happens?
A will has to go through a legal process called probate. Probate is the court-supervised authentication of the will.
And court means lawyers, judges, and time.
Lots of time. Probate is notoriously slow. It can lock up your assets for 6 months, a year, sometimes longer.
Wait, so the family can't even get the money?
Exactly. Meaning your family can't access the funds they might desperately need to pay your mortgage or funeral expenses. Furthermore, probate is a matter of public record.
Oh, no.
Yeah, anyone can go to the courthouse and see exactly what you owned, who you owed money to, and who was inheriting your wealth, which immediately makes your beneficiaries targets for scammers.
It's awful.
And finally, the cost of probate, so executor fees, attorney fees, court costs, is often calculated as a percentage of the gross value of the estate. It can easily consume 3 to 5% or more of everything you've built.
Okay, so if you have a $500,000 estate, probate could eat up $25,000. Suddenly, paying a lawyer $3,000 up front to set up a trust looks like the bargain of the century.
Exactly. The mechanism of a trust bypasses probate entirely. A trust is a distinct legal entity. When you create a revocable living trust, you literally transfer ownership of your house and your bank accounts from your personal name into the name of the trust.
But I still control it.
Yes, you still control everything while you're alive because you are the trustee. And immediately, privately, and seamlessly transfers the assets to your beneficiaries.
No courts, no public records, no percentage-based fees.
Right.
It's like a localized private legal system you build for your own family. Okay, so that covers what happens after you're gone. But the defensive foundation also has to cover the terrifying gray area. Like, what happens if you were still alive, but a medical emergency leaves you incapacitated? You're in a coma, or you have advanced dementia.
This is where we shift from protecting assets to protecting autonomy. The material highlights 2 critical documents here. The first is a power of attorney for finances.
Okay.
If you are incapacitated, your spouse or your children cannot simply walk into your bank and start paying your mortgage out of your individual checking account or, sell your car to cover medical debt. The bank will block them.
Because they aren't the account holder.
Right. A power of attorney legally delegates a trusted individual to act as your agent. It gives them the keys to your financial life, so the machinery doesn't grind to a halt while you are in a hospital bed.
That is so important. And the medical side of that equation is the Advanced Healthcare Directive, often called a living will, right?
Right. Exactly.
This spells out exactly what kind of life-sustaining treatment you want or explicitly do not want if you cannot communicate. Like, do you want to be kept on a ventilator? Do you want a feeding tube?
And these are agonizing, impossible decisions. The material roots these documents in a very, specific psychological concept, peace of mind.
Right.
But it's not just your peace of mind. If you do not put these directives in writing, you are forcing your grieving, exhausted family members to make those literal life or death choices in the sterile hallway of an intensive care unit.
That is just a horrific burden to leave on someone.
It is. And if family members disagree on what you would have wanted, it destroys relationships. Writing an advance directive is the ultimate act of taking care of your dependents. You are removing the burden of guesswork.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack this. So we've built the defensive moat. The worst case scenarios are mathematically and legally mitigated. Now we have to pivot to the daily reality of money flowing in and out, the systems we rely on every single week, which brings us right back to that classic rude awakening, the first time you look at a pay stub and realize the distance between gross pay and net pay.
Yes. The gross pay is the theoretical number you negotiated with your boss. The net pay, your take-home pay, is the reality of what actually hits your bank account after the system has taken its cut.
And the most significant non-negotiable deduction for most Americans is FICA.
Right, FICA, the Federal Insurance Contributions Act. It's a payroll tax that funds two massive foundational pillars of the American safety net, Social Security and Medicare.
Let's analyze Social Security first. It is primarily a retirement benefit system, though it also covers disability.
Yeah.
Looking at the mechanics of how you claim your retirement benefits, it is arguably the most consequential math problem of your senior years.
It really is a masterclass in behavioral economics and risk assessment. The system forces you to choose when to pull the trigger. You are allowed to start claiming your Social Security benefits as early as age 62.
But the system penalizes you for doing so, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you claim at 62, your monthly check is permanently, significantly reduced, sometimes by up to 30%, compared to what you would get at your full retirement age, which is 66 or 67, depending on your birth year.
Wait, so if I wait until my full retirement age, I get my baseline amount. And if
Right.
I have the discipline and the cash flow to hold out until I am 70 years old, the benefit maxes out. It increases by something like 8% every year I delay past full retirement age.
That's right.
I look at this like the ultimate high-stakes marshmallow test for adults. Do I take the small marshmallow right now at 62, or do I stare at it for 8 agonizing years to get the giant marshmallow at 70?
It's an excellent analogy.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the structural friction of that decision. Why wouldn't everyone just wait until 70?
Because you might not live that long.
Exactly. Because of the ultimate wild card, life expectancy. You have to calculate the break-even point. If you take the smaller checks at 62, you are collecting money for 8 solid years before the 70-year-old even sees their first dime.
Right. So the person who waited until 70 is getting bigger checks, but they have to live long enough for those bigger checks to eventually surpass the massive head start the 62-year-old got.
Exactly. Mathematically, that break-even point is usually around age 80 or 82. If you have a family history of heart disease and you don't expect to live past 75, claiming at 62 is the mathematically correct choice.
But if you expect to live a long time,
If you have incredible longevity genes and plan to live to 95, waiting until 70 yields hundreds of thousands of dollars more over your lifetime.
But I want to throw a wrench into this whole calculation because there is a massive anxiety among younger workers. I see headlines constantly saying, Social Security is going broke.
Yes, that's a very common fear.
So if I'm 35 right now, why should I even factor this into my planning? Shouldn't I just assume the marshmallow is going to evaporate before I even get to the table?
It's a completely rational fear
Here.
driven by very real demographic shifts.
Yeah.
The material actually addresses this directly. The Social Security Trust Fund reserves are projected to be depleted sometime in the mid-2030s.
See, that sounds terrifying.
But we must define what depleted actually means in this context, because it does not mean the system vanishes into thin air.
So it's not like a corporation going bankrupt and shutting its doors.
Correct. The system operates on a pay-as-you-go mechanism. Today's workers are paying for today's retirees through that FICA tax.
Okay.
The problem is demographic. The baby boomer generation is massive and they are retiring while birth rates have dropped. There are fewer workers supporting each retiree than there were 40 years ago. So the system is paying out more than it is taking in.
I see.
The trust fund is the surplus that was built up over decades, and that surplus is what is being depleted.
So what happens when the surplus hits zero in 2034 or whenever it happens?
By law, the system can only pay out what it takes in. If Congress does absolutely nothing, which is highly unlikely, benefits would be automatically reduced across the board, perhaps to 75 or 80% of what was promised.
Okay, so you still get something, just not everything.
Right. To prevent that, the government will have to reform the system. They might raise the full retirement age to 69 or 70. They might increase the FICA tax rate. They might eliminate the cap on how much income is subject to the tax.
So the structural takeaway here, regardless of what Congress does, is that relying on Social Security as your primary retirement plan is just a recipe for poverty. It is a safety net. It is designed to keep the elderly from starving. It is not designed to fund a comfortable lifestyle. It must be a supplement to your own investments.
Precisely. Now, the other half of that FICA deduction is Medicare. And the healthcare landscape in the U.S. is basically a labyrinth of terminology. The material spends a lot of time decoding the alphabet soup, starting with the vital distinction between Medicare and Medicaid.
And the names are so frustratingly similar that millions of people confuse them.
They do. And mixing them up can be disastrous for your planning. The underlying mechanism of qualification is the difference. Medicare is strictly age-based. It is the federal health insurance program for people 65 and older, period.
So you pay into it your whole working life and you unlock it at 65.
Exactly. Medicaid, on the other hand, is income-based. It is a joint federal and state program designed to provide health care for individuals and families with very low income and limited assets, regardless of their age.
But I understand there are scenarios where the two overlap, the concept of being dual eligible.
Yes. If you are over 65, so you qualify for Medicare, but your income and life savings are so incredibly low that you fall below the poverty thresholds, you can qualify for Medicaid simultaneously.
Oh.
In those cases, Medicaid often steps in to pay the premiums and out-of-pocket costs that Medicare doesn't cover. But to qualify, many elderly people have to go through a heartbreaking process called spending down their assets.
Spending down.
They literally have to exhaust almost all of their life savings paying for medical care before the state will finally step in with Medicaid.
That is just a brutal mechanism. And even if you just stick to Medicare, it isn't a single, simple insurance card. You have to navigate the different parts. Like Part A covers the massive structural costs in patient hospital stays. Part B covers the everyday medical needs, doctor visits, outpatient care, preventative services.
And then the private sector enters the picture. Part C, also known as Medicare Advantage, is an alternative where private insurance companies bundle Part A and Part B and often add dental or vision, but usually restrict you to a specific network of doctors.
Right.
And finally, Part D, which you purchase separately to cover prescription drugs.
The complexity is just staggering, which reinforces the premise of our entire deep dive. You cannot wait until you are 64 and a half to start learning this vocabulary. You have to understand the mechanics before the crisis hits.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's step back from the government systems and look at everyday banking. We know what checking accounts are for daily flow, and we know traditional savings accounts are for setting money aside. But right now, traditional savings accounts are paying something like 0.01% interest. It's essentially a digital mattress.
Pretty much.
So the material introduces the high-yield savings account.
High-yield accounts are a fundamental tool for anyone looking to optimize their emergency fund. Traditional brick-and-mortar banks have massive overhead costs, thousands of physical branches, tellers, security, utilities. To pay for that overhead, they offer you virtually nothing on your deposits.
Right, but online banks don't have that.
Exactly. Yeah. High-yield savings accounts are predominantly offered by online-only banks. Because they don't have the real estate overhead, they pass those savings on to the consumer in the form of significantly higher interest rates, sometimes 4 or 5%, depending on the broader economic environment.
It's the easiest money you will ever make. Just moving your emergency fund from a legacy bank to an online high-yield account can generate hundreds of dollars a year in passive income. But what if you want to push for an even higher yield? The material mentions certificates of deposit or CDs.
Yes.
I get that a CD pays more, but what is the actual mechanism? Why does a bank pay me more for a CD than a savings account? What's the catch?
To understand the catch, you have to understand how banks actually operate. A bank is not a vault that just holds your money. A bank is a highly leveraged financial engine. They take your deposits and they immediately lend them out to other people in the form of 30-year mortgages or auto loans. This is called fractional reserve banking.
So my money isn't actually just sitting there. They're actively using it to make more money for themselves.
Exactly. They might pay you 4% on your deposit and charge someone else 7% for a mortgage, and they pocket the difference. But this creates a massive risk for the bank. Liquidity.
Because what happens if they lend your money out for 30 years, but you walk in tomorrow and want to withdraw your entire savings?
If too many people do that at once, the bank doesn't have the cash.
Right.
Precisely. So a certificate of deposit is a contract designed to solve the bank's liquidity risk. You agree to lock your money away with the bank for a fixed, guaranteed term, 6 months, a year, maybe 5 years.
Oh, I see.
In exchange for giving the bank the absolute certainty that they can lend your money out without you demanding it back unexpectedly, they reward you with a higher guaranteed interest rate.
So the catch is your loss of liquidity.
Exactly. The catch is you can't touch it. If your car transmission blows up and you need that money before the CD term expires, the bank will hit you with an early withdrawal penalty, which often wipes out any interest you earn.
It's a trade-off. You trade flexibility for yield. But whether my money is in a check account, a high-yield account, or a CD, there is an invisible safety net operating underneath all of it. The FDIC. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Yes, that's crucial.
The material notes that the FDIC insures your deposits up to $250,000 per depositor per institution. But let's look at the psychology of this. Why does the federal government step in to guarantee $250,000 of private banking deposits?
Because without that guarantee, human psychology would inevitably destroy the financial system. We touched on the idea that banks lend out most of the money deposited with them.
Right.
If a rumor starts circulating on social media that a specific bank made bad investments and might be in trouble, rational self-interest takes over.
Oh, definitely. If I think my bank is going under, I'm going to run down there and pull every single dollar out immediately.
And if thousands of people do the exact same thing at the exact same time, you have a bank run. And because the bank has lent the money out for mortgages, they literally do not have enough cash in the vault to pay everyone. The rumor becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The panic causes the collapse.
Wow.
The FDIC was actually created during the Great Depression to short-circuit that psychological panic. By placing the full faith and credit of the U.S. government behind your deposits, they remove the incentive to panic. If the bank fails, the government makes you whole. Therefore, you don't run to the bank. It is a psychological manipulation designed to create systemic stability.
That is fascinating. Okay, so your money is safe from a bank collapse. But as we pivot into the next section of the deep dive, we realize that the money sitting safely in that FDIC-insured vault isn't actually static. It is constantly under attack. You might not lose the number in your account, but you are losing its power. And that introduces the terrifying macroeconomic force of inflation.
Inflation is the silent thief in the banking system. It is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services rises, which means the purchasing power of your currency is falling. The material uses a very visceral idiom. Your money doesn't go as far.
It's the most relatable economic concept in existence. I mean, we all feel it at the grocery store. $100 today buys a fraction of the groceries it bought 5 years ago.
And this is why keeping all your wealth in cash is a guaranteed mathematical loss. If your high-yield savings account is paying you 4%, but inflation is running at 6%, your real return is negative 2%. You are slowly bleeding purchasing power every single day.
So the entity tasked with fighting this invisible thief is the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the U.S. But their primary weapon against inflation seems so indirect. I mean, they don't control the price of eggs. They control interest rates. How does making borrowing more expensive actually stop the price of eggs from going up?
We have to trace the mechanism down through the economy. Inflation is fundamentally caused by too much money chasing too few goods. Demand outstrips supply. To lower prices, you have to kill demand.
Okay, so how do they do that?
The Federal Reserve raises the baseline interest rate. This makes it more expensive for commercial banks to borrow money, so the banks immediately raise the rates they charge consumers and businesses.
Oh, so the mortgage rates jump from 3% to 7%, credit card rates jump to 24%.
Exactly. And when borrowing becomes that expensive, human behavior shifts. A business owner decides not to take out a loan to build a new factory. Because they don't build the factory, they don't hire 50 new construction workers.
Right.
Because those 50 workers don't have new high-paying jobs, they don't go out and buy new cars or bid up the price of houses. Demand across the entire economy cools down. When demand drops, corporations can no longer raise prices and inflation stalls.
But the material calls us a double-edged sword. And looking at that chain reaction you just described, I see why. You are curing the disease of inflation by intentionally inducing economic pain. Yes, the price of eggs stops going up, but you've caused mortgage payments to skyrocket, and you've effectively stopped businesses from hiring.
It is an incredibly delicate balancing act. And if the Federal Reserve raises rates too high or keeps them high for too long, they don't just cool the economy, they freeze it. Companies don't just stop hiring, they start firing. Consumer spending plummets. And that triggers the other massive macroeconomic fear, a recession.
Right, and a recession is technically defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, like 6 straight months of the entire national economy shrinking.
But the material approaches recessions with profound pragmatism. It doesn't treat them as anomalies. It treats them as inevitable cyclical realities of the capitalist system. You cannot prevent the tide from going out.
So what's the goal?
The goal is not to prevent the recession, but to structure your personal finances so that you can weather the storm rather than going under.
Going under, meaning bankrupt or losing your home. And weathering the storm means relying on that emergency fund we talked about and having minimal high-interest debt so your monthly cash flow requirements are low.
Yes. But there is a more proactive defense mechanism here. If macroeconomic forces like inflation are constantly eroding your wealth, playing defense isn't enough. You have to aggressively increase your inflow. You have to advocate for your own value in the workplace.
Which brings us to the mechanics of negotiation. And this is fascinating because the material highlights a massive, invisible barrier that stops people from earning what they are worth. The cultural taboo of discussing money.
In polite society, and certainly within corporate culture, talking about your salary is heavily stigmatized.
Yeah.
Employers rely on this taboo.
Because it benefits them.
Exactly. Information asymmetry benefits the employer. If nobody on the team knows what the others are making, the employer can severely underpay top performers.
Breaking that taboo is step 1. But how do you actually negotiate? The material focuses heavily on the concept of leverage. How do you generate leverage if you are just a standard employee asking for more money?
Leverage is power in a negotiation, and in the labor market, leverage is generated by data and alternatives. You must thoroughly research the market rate for your specific role in your specific city with your specific years of experience. You cannot walk into a manager's office and say, my rent went up, I need a raise.
Right, because the company does not care about your personal expenses.
Not at all.
Framing is everything. You have to anchor the conversation to objective business value. Like, I've researched the market, and similar roles managing this volume of accounts are compensating in the $90,000 range. Over the last year, I've streamlined our onboarding process, saving the department X amount of hours. I believe my compensation should reflect that market value and the results I'm delivering.
That is the perfect mechanism. You are removing emotion and presenting a business case. But what happens if they acknowledge your value, but claim the budget is entirely frozen?
Right. That happens all the time.
The material suggests asking about flexibility and compensation, which introduces the idea of perks.
And I have a serious bone to pick with corporate perks. If a company tells me they can't meet my salary request, but they offer summer Fridays, free snacks in the break room, or a subsidized gym membership, I feel like I'm being manipulated.
Are perks largely just a corporate distraction from the fact that they are underpaying your base salary?
It is a vital distinction, and you have to be ruthlessly analytical about evaluating perks. Yes, a ping pong table and free kombucha are window dressing. They do not compound,
Right.
They do not build long-term wealth. But the material highlights structural perks that have massive, quantifiable monetary value.
Like what? Tuition reimbursement. If a company refuses to give you a $10,000 raise, but agrees to pay $20,000 for you to get your MBA, that is a wealth-building perk. They are funding an asset, your education, that you take with you when you leave. Another massive lever is stock options, or RSUs, restricted stock units.
Explain the mechanism of stock options, because this is how tech employees actually get rich.
A stock option is a contract giving you the right to buy shares of the company's stock at a predetermined fixed price, called the strike price, sometime in the future.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine you are granted option to buy stock at $10 a share. You work there for 4 years helping the company grow, and the public stock price hits $50 a share. You exercise your option, buying those shares for your locked-in price of $10, and you can immediately sell them for $50, pocketing a massive profit. It aligns your financial incentives with the growth of the company.
But those options usually come with a vesting schedule. They don't just hand them to you on day one. You have to stay at the company for a certain number of years to unlock them, which is a retention tool. It keeps you locked in.
Exactly. It's a golden handcuff. But let's return to the raise scenario. You make your data-driven case, you ask for base salary, you evaluate the perks, And the manager still looks you in the eye and says a flat, unequivocal no. The ultimate lesson from the material here is do not burn bridges.
To burn a bridge means to completely destroy a professional relationship in a way that cannot be repaired, like throwing a tantrum, issuing an ultimatum you aren't prepared to back up, or rage quitting.
Which is an emotional response, not a strategic one.
Yeah.
If you get a no, you pivot immediately to a roadmap. You ask, I understand it's a no today. What specific measurable milestones do I need to hit over the next 6 months to turn this into a yes?
Oh, that's smart.
You get those metrics in writing, and if you hit them in 6 months and they still say no, then you use your ultimate leverage. You take your skills to a competitor.
Okay, so you execute this perfectly. You negotiate aggressively, you beat inflation, you optimize your taxes, and you are accumulating real, tangible wealth. This is the exact moment we must transition into defense. Because the moment you have wealth, you have a target on your back. Scammers do not target the broke, they target the accumulations of capital.
And the most fascinating takeaway from the material on fraud is that modern scammers have largely abandoned attacking computer systems. Firewalls and encryption are just too strong now. Instead, they attack the weakest link in the security chain, human psychology.
The amygdala, the fear center of the brain. The material dives into phishing, which is the classic email or text scam. Someone pretends to be Netflix or your bank or Amazon, but the mechanism that makes it work isn't the fake logo, it's the weaponization of a sense of urgency.
This is the psychological hack. The message never says, please update your password at your convenience. It says urgent, fraudulent charge detected. Your account will be permanently locked in 24 hours if you do not click this link to verify your identity.
And people panic.
Exactly. When the human brain perceives a sudden, urgent threat, the prefrontal cortex, the logical, critical thinking part of the brain, is bypassed. The amygdala takes over, inducing panic. And in a state of panic, you click the link without inspecting the URL, you type in your password, and you hand the keys over to a criminal.
So the defensive rule is incredibly simple. Distance. If you receive an unsolicited urgent message, close it. Do not click. Open a new browser window, type in the actual website of your bank, and see if there are any alerts on your actual dashboard. And this exact same urgency tactic is used in the IRS impersonation scam, which is terrifying.
It is terrifying because the IRS actually has the power to garnish wages and seize assets. The scam involves an unsolicited phone call from someone claiming to be a federal agent. They tell you that you owe back taxes and that local police are en route to your home to arrest you unless you pay immediately over the phone.
But the material points out the glaring red flags that people miss in the heat of the moment. The actual IRS operates via the U.S. Postal Service. They send letters. They will never call you out of the blue demanding immediate payment. And the biggest red flag, the scammer will demand payment via iTunes gift cards, wire transfers, or cryptocurrency.
Because those payment methods are untraceable and irreversible. The IRS does not accept Apple gift cards as legal tender. But again, under the threat of arrest, logic completely fails.
Now, those scams prey on fear. But what about the scams that prey on greed? The material brings up the classic Ponzi scheme. Most people have heard of Bernie Madoff, but how does the mechanism of a Ponzi scheme actually function? How do they trick sophisticated investors for so long?
A Ponzi scheme creates the illusion of a brilliant investment strategy by fundamentally lying about the source of the returns. The fraudster promises unusually high, incredibly consistent returns with zero risk.
Which should be the first red flag.
Absolutely. Let's say they promise 10% every month. You give them $1,000. The next month, they show you an account statement saying you made $100. But they didn't actually invest your money in the market.
So where did the $100 come from?
From the next victim. The scammer takes the capital deposited by new investors and uses it to pay the returns to the earlier investors. When you see that you are actually getting paid, you tell your friends. They invest. The influx of new money keeps the illusion alive.
It's a house of cards that relies entirely on an ever-expanding base of new victims. And the moment the inflow of new money stops, or too many people try to cash out at once, like during a recession, the fraudster doesn't have the cash, and the entire thing implodes, wiping out billions of dollars.
Which is why the material highlights the ultimate unbreakable rule of finance. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. Risk and reward are inextricably linked. If someone promises you high rewards with zero downside risk, they are lying, period.
But what if you are perfectly vigilant? You don't click the links, you hang up on the fake IRS, and you ignore the Ponzi schemes. You can still have your financial life destroyed through identity theft simply because a major corporation gets hacked and your social security number leaks onto the dark web.
And this is where mitigation and rapid response are your only defenses. Identity theft is the reality of someone fraudulently assuming your identity to open credit cards, take out massive personal loans, or even secure medical care under your name. It can wreck your credit score and take thousands of hours to untangle.
The material lists very specific defensive steps. You have to monitor your credit report. You can go to annualcreditreport.com and pull your file to ensure there aren't mortgages in states you've never visited. But the technical defense is 2FA, two-factor authentication.
Passwords are no longer sufficient. Even if a password is long and complex, if it leaks in a database breach, a hacker has it. 2FA requires a second piece of evidence before granting access.
What, a text message?
Usually, yes, a temporary, randomly generated code sent to your phone or produced by an authenticator app. So even if the hacker in another country has your exact password, they cannot log into your bank unless they physically possess your unlocked smartphone to get that second code.
And if you do suspect your identity has been compromised, the material stresses that time is of the essence. You cannot wait until the weekend to deal with it. You must immediately contact the major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, and put a freeze on your credit. This legally blocks any institution from accessing your credit file, making it impossible for the scammer to open new accounts in your name.
And you must file an official report at identitytheft.gov, which creates a legal record that you are not responsible for the fraudulent debts.
Okay, but let's talk about the scenario where the financial ruin isn't caused by a criminal. It's caused by the harsh realities of life, a brutal divorce, a failed small business, or an uncovered medical catastrophe that leaves you hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. You are drowning in debt, as the material puts it. This brings us to the legal mechanism of last resort, bankruptcy.
Bankruptcy is a constitutional right in the U.S. designed to provide relief to individuals who are hopelessly buried under debt they can never mathematically repay. It is a legal process governed by federal courts, and the material distinguishes between the two primary paths for individuals, Chapter 7 and Chapter 13.
Let's examine the mechanics of Chapter 7 first, because this is the one people usually think of. It's often referred to as liquidation.
In a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, the court appoints a trustee to review everything you own. Certain assets are exempt, meaning you get to keep them, usually a modest car, basic household goods, and sometimes some equity in a primary home.
But the rest?
Any non-exempt assets, a second car, a boat, an expensive art collection are seized, liquidated, which means sold for cash, and that cash is distributed to the people you owe money to.
And once that liquidation process is complete, what happens to the remaining debt? If I owed $100,000 in credit cards and selling my stuff only covered $20,000, what about the other $80,000?
The remaining eligible debts are legally discharged. They are permanently wiped out. The creditors are legally barred from ever trying to collect that money from you again. You get a clean slate.
But the cost of that clean slate is catastrophic to your financial reputation. The material notes that a Chapter 7 bankruptcy remains on your credit report for 10 years. For a decade, you are branded as a massive risk. It becomes nearly impossible to get a mortgage, difficult to rent an apartment, and you'll pay exorbitant interest rates on any car loan you manage to secure.
Which is why the courts offer an alternative for people who actually have a steady income but have just fallen too far behind. Chapter 13. This is a reorganization bankruptcy. The mechanics here are completely different. There is no liquidation. You get to keep all your property.
So how do the creditors get paid?
The court looks at your income and your living expenses, and they mandate a strict, structured repayment plan lasting 3 to 5 years. Every month, you make a single consolidated payment to the bankruptcy trustee, who then distributes the money to your creditors.
Okay, so you still pay.
You are forced to live on a very tight budget for those 3 to 5 years, but you keep your house. And Chapter 13 stays on your credit report for 7 years instead of 10.
But the underlying message of the material is to fight like hell to avoid the courtroom entirely. Before you drop the nuclear bomb of bankruptcy on your credit file, look at alternatives. Debt consolidation, where you roll multiple high-interest credit cards into a single lower-interest personal loan. But my favorite piece of advice from the material is the simplest. Negotiate with your creditors directly. It never hurts to ask.
People assume credit card companies are unfeeling monoliths. But they are businesses, and they understand math. If you are on the verge of bankruptcy and you file Chapter 7, That credit card company knows they're going to get pennies on the dollar or absolutely nothing.
So if I call them and say, listen, I lost my job, I have $30,000 in debt, I'm going to file for bankruptcy next week unless we can work something out, what do they do?
They will almost always transfer you to a hardship or mitigation department. They might slash your interest rate to zero, waive the late fees, and put you on a 5-year repayment plan. They would rather slowly recover the principal amount over 5 years than watch the debt get legally discharged in court. You have leverage, even when you are broke. But you have to communicate.
Okay, we've covered the math. We've covered the systems, the laws, the defensive strategies. But if the math of avoiding bankruptcy or building an emergency fund is basically just third-grade addition and subtraction, why do so many incredibly smart, high-earning people end up drowning in credit card debt? Or why do they self-sabotage their careers? There has to be a psychological glitch in the system.
The glitch is that human beings are not rational economic actors. Money is not just math. It is a profound emotional trigger tied to survival, status, and trauma. The material introduces a brilliant concept from financial psychology called money scripts.
Money scripts. These are the deep-seated, unconscious beliefs about money that we absorb during our formative childhood years. We watch how our parents behave around money, the stress it causes, or the power it wields, and we write a script that operates silently in the background of our adult lives.
Exactly. And because they are unconscious, they dictate our behavior without us realizing it. Let's look at the mechanics of self-sabotage. Suppose you grew up in a household where the primary money script was, money is the root of all evil, rich people are greedy and corrupt. You absorb that belief. 30 years later, you are offered a massive promotion that will double your salary.
Logically, I should take it.
But subconsciously, your money script tells you that accumulating that much wealth will make you a bad person. So you inexplicably start showing up late to work. You fumble a major presentation. You self-sabotage the promotion to protect your internal identity.
Or the exact opposite script. Money equals love and security. If you grew up experiencing deep financial scarcity, your adult script might dictate that there is never enough. You might build a multi-million-dollar net worth, but you are still terrified to spend $5 on a coffee. You live in a state of perpetual anxiety, unable to actually enjoy the utility of the wealth you've built.
And the friction becomes explosive when two people with completely different money scripts enter a relationship. The material explicitly states that money is the leading cause of relationship stress and divorce.
Because it's not actually about the math. If a compulsive spender marries a terrified penny pincher, they aren't arguing about a $200 pair of shoes. The spender is buying the shoes for a dopamine hit of status or comfort, and the penny pincher is terrified because that $200 represents a loss of survival security. They're speaking two entirely different psychological languages.
Which is why the material advocates for financial compatibility. This absolutely does not mean you have to earn the same amount of money. It means you must communicate openly about your scripts, get on the same page regarding your shared goals, and establish a framework for how money is handled.
The actionable advice here is the concept of money dates, removing the stigma and the stress from the conversation. Instead of only talking about money when the credit card bill arrives and everyone is defensive, you schedule a specific time. You pour a glass of wine, you order a pizza, and you sit down as a team to review the net worth, the budget, and the goals. It transforms the friction into collaboration.
And part of that collaboration, part of gaining control over the psychology of money, is mastering the actual language we use to describe it. The material, being an English learning podcast, spends considerable time on the idioms of American finance.
I found this section incredibly illuminating. Because utilizing these idioms isn't just about sounding casual at a cocktail party. It signals financial fluency in a business setting. If you understand the nuance of these phrases, you prove that you understand the underlying capitalist machinery. We don't need to read the whole glossary, but let's dive deep into a few of them and unpack why they exist. Let's start with being nickel and dimed.
Nickel and dimed perfectly encapsulates a very specific type of American corporate strategy, the unbundling of services to obscure the true cost. It means being charged small, seemingly insignificant fees repeatedly, which aggregate into a massive expense.
The ultimate example is the budget airline industry. They advertise a flight for $39, but when you get to the airport, they charge you $50 to bring a carry-on bag, $20 to choose a seat so you can sit next to your child, and $5 for a bottle of water. By the end of the trip, you paid more than you would have on a premium airline. You were nickel and dimed. The psychological mechanism is that the brain registers the initial low price and minimizes the pain of the subsequent small fees, even though the total math is terrible.
Precisely. Let's look at another one. A cash cow. This is a term pulled straight from business matrix theory. A cash cow is a product, a service, or a division of a company that has a massive market share in a slow-growing industry.
It doesn't require constant innovation or huge marketing budgets. It just sits in the pasture, metaphorically, and produces an endless stream of reliable, immense profit. Microsoft Office is a cash cow for Microsoft. They built it decades ago, and every business on Earth just pays the subscription fee year after year.
And those reliable profits from the cash cow are often used to fund risky, innovative new ventures. It is the financial foundation of business. Then we have the idiom deep pockets. This refers to an individual or an organization with vast, almost inexhaustible financial resources.
And it's usually used in the context of leverage or litigation. We can't sue that massive pharmaceutical company over this issue. They have deep pockets. They will hire an army of lawyers and drag the court case out for 10 years until we are bankrupt. It reflects the reality that in the legal and business world, capital equates to endurance.
And finally, let's contrast that with the phrase bail someone out. Historically, this meant paying the financial bond to release someone from jail. But financially, it means rescuing a person or a corporation from imminent ruin by injecting external capital.
A parent bailing out a 20-something child who maxed out their credit cards. Or on a macro level, the federal government bailing out the major banks in 2008. The controversy around bailing someone out is the concept of moral hazard.
Oh, moral hazard is a huge concept.
If you constantly bail your child out of their credit card debt, they never experience the painful consequences of their spending, so they never rewrite their money script, they just do it again.
Exactly. Understanding these idioms gives you a shorthand for incredibly complex economic behaviors. Now, if we connect this psychological mastery to the broader timeline of your life, we can move out of the day-to-day defense and look at the long game. Future-proofing.
This is where we confront the two most massive structural financial burdens an individual will face in their lifetime: education and healthcare. Let's tackle education first. The material notes that the cost of college has skyrocketed, which is almost an understatement. The inflation rate of higher education has vastly outpaced the general economy. A 4-year degree at a state university can easily exceed $100,000, and private institutions are pushing $350,000. If you just try to save that in a regular bank account, the taxes on your interest will drag you down.
Which is why the government created a specific tax advantage vehicle to incentivize education savings, the 529 plan. The mechanics of a 529 are incredibly powerful if utilized early. You deposit after-tax money into the account. You then invest that money in mutual funds within the plan. As the investments grow over 10 or 15 years, you do not pay a single dime of capital gains tax on the growth.
And the true magic happens at the end. When your child is ready for college, you withdraw the money to pay for qualified education expenses, tuition, mandatory fees, room and board, textbooks. And those withdrawals are completely 100% tax-free.
It is an incredible shield against taxation. But the material highlights a strategic cultural shift regarding the 529. It doesn't just have to be funded by the parents. Anyone can contribute.
This is the part that gets me really excited. It's the ultimate life hack for extended families. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, they constantly want to buy gifts for a toddler. They buy a $50 plastic toy that the kid plays with for 10 minutes before breaking it. Instead, the material suggests reframing this. Put that $50 into the child's 529 plan. The material calls it the gift that keeps on giving.
Let's run the math on that to show the mechanism of compounding. If grandparents contribute $100 a month to a 529 plan from the day a child is born, assuming a reasonable 7% market return, that account will hold roughly $45,000 by the time the child is 18. The grandparents only contributed $21,000 out of pocket. The other $24,000 is pure tax-free growth generated by the market. You're utilizing time to generate wealth.
It fundamentally changes the trajectory of a young adult's life if they can graduate without being crushed by student loans. Now let's pivot to the second massive structural cost, healthcare. We talked about Medicare earlier, but how do you survive the medical costs while you are still working? The material introduces an account it literally describes as a game changer, the HSA, or Health Savings Account.
I cannot stress enough how uniquely powerful the HSA is within the United States tax code. Every other retirement or savings account forces you to compromise. A traditional IRA gives you a tax break today, but taxes you when you withdraw. A Roth IRA taxes you today but gives you tax-free withdrawals later. The HSA does not compromise. It offers an unparalleled triple tax advantage.
Let's walk through the 3 pillars of this advantage because it almost sounds like a loophole.
First, the money you contribute to an HSA is tax deductible. If you put $4,000 into it this year, you get to subtract $4,000 from your taxable income, lowering your immediate tax bill. Second, once the money is inside the account, it doesn't just sit in cash. You can invest it in index funds, and the growth, the dividends, the compounding interest, it is all completely tax-free. Third, when you eventually withdraw the money to pay for a qualified medical expense, a surgery, a prescription, dental work, that withdrawal is completely tax-free.
Money goes in untaxed, grows untaxed, and comes out untaxed. It is the holy grail of accounts. But, as with all things in finance, there is a mechanism of friction. You are not simply allowed to open an HSA just because you want one. You must be enrolled in a specific type of insurance, an HDHP, or high-deductible health plan.
This is the trade-off. An HDHP charges you a much lower monthly premium than a traditional insurance plan. However, the deductible amount you must pay out of your own pocket before the insurance company pays a dime is significantly higher. It might be $3,000, $4,000, or $5,000.
So the government's logic is, we are giving you this incredible tax-sheltered account specifically so you can build up the cash reserves needed to cover that massive deductible if you get into a car crash.
That is the intended design. But the material points out an absolute pro tip for high-earning individuals who can afford to absorb the friction. You do not have to reimburse yourself from the HSA immediately. There is no time limit.
This is where it gets wild. Let's say I go to the hospital and I get a $2,000 bill. I have $2,000 in my HSA, but I also have plenty of cash in my regular checking account. The pro tip says, pay the hospital bill out of your checking account, save the receipt, and leave the HSA money alone. Why?
Because you want that $2,000 in the HSA to stay invested in the stock market, compounding tax-free for decades. If you pull it out today, you kill the compounding engine. You save all your medical receipts in a digital folder for 20 years. When you are 60 years old, you can walk into the bank with a stack of 20-year-old receipts and pull out decades worth of medical expenses from the HSA completely tax-free.
And if I never have enough medical expenses to drain the account,
then the rules shift in your favor again at age 65. Once you hit 65, you can withdraw money from the HSA for any non-medical reason, buying a boat, going on vacation, without facing the severe 20% penalty. You will simply pay normal income tax on the withdrawal, exactly like a traditional 401k.
Oh.
It morphs into a superpowered retirement account.
It is brilliant, but we must clearly distinguish the HSA from its very dangerous cousin, the FSA, the flexible spending account. They sound identical, they're both for medical expenses, but the underlying mechanics are vastly different.
The crucial difference is ownership and time. You own your HSA, it rolls over year after year, job after job. An FSA is generally owned by your employer, and it carries one of the most punitive rules in finance. Use it or lose it.
Right. You decide during open enrollment to put, say, $2,000 into an FSA for the upcoming year. It comes out of your paycheck tax-free. But if you get to December 31st and you've only spent $500 on copays and prescriptions,
you legally forfeit the remaining $1,500. It vanishes. It goes back to your employer to offset the administrative costs of the plan. Some employers offer a slight grace period into the first few months of the next year, or allow a tiny amount to roll over, but fundamentally, you are penalized for being healthy and not accurately predicting the future.
It forces you into a spending frenzy in late December, buying 5 pairs of prescription sunglasses just so you don't lose the cash. The FSA requires precise prediction. The HSA requires long-term investment. Now, looking at the long term, the material forces us to confront the financial life stages. In your 20s, you're battling student loans and building emergency funds. In your 30s and 40s, you're juggling a mortgage, raising kids, and trying to max out retirement accounts. But when you hit your 50s and 60s, the entire financial calculus violently shifts toward the reality of the human body breaking down: healthcare.
And the numbers the material provides regarding retirement healthcare are sobering. Fidelity runs an annual study, and the current projection is that a healthy 65-year-old couple retiring today will need to spend over $300,000 on healthcare out of pocket during their retirement years.
$300,000. That is a staggering reality. You spend your whole life paying off a house, and then you have to generate the equivalent of another mortgage just to stay alive and functioning. And the most terrifying part, That $300,000 primarily covers Medicare premiums, copays, and prescription drugs. It explicitly does not cover the most catastrophic expense of aging, long-term care.
This is the blind spot for millions of families. Medicare is health insurance. It pays for doctors to fix medical problems. It pays for a surgeon to repair your broken hip. It does not pay for custodial care. If you develop Alzheimer's or you simply become too frail to bathe yourself, dress yourself, or cook for yourself, Medicare will not pay for a nursing home. It will not pay for an in-home aid.
And the material points out that the cost of these facilities is eye-watering. A private room in a nursing home can easily cost $8,000 to $10,000 a month. That's over $100,000 a year. You could work for 40 years, save $1 million, and watch a nursing home completely drain your life's work in 8 years.
Leaving nothing for your spouse to live on, and no legacy for your children. Which brings us to the defensive mechanism, long-term care insurance. It functions exactly like it sounds. You pay a premium, and if you lose the ability to perform basic activities of daily living, the policy pays out a daily benefit to cover the nursing home or the home health aid.
But the friction here is timing. If you wait until you are 75 and starting to show signs of cognitive decline, the insurance companies will either deny you entirely or the premiums will be so astronomically high you can't afford them. The strategy is to investigate these policies in your mid-50s while you're still healthy, locking in a manageable premium so you are better off when the inevitable decline occurs.
It is the ultimate test of prioritizing future stability over current consumption.
All right, let's zoom out. Look at the landscape we have covered today. We have analyzed the mathematical nuances of life insurance and the legal friction of probate. We've navigated the massive government machineries of FICA, Social Security, and Medicaid. We've examined the central bank's fight against inflation, the tactical maneuvers of salary negotiation, the psychological warfare of phishing scams, the emotional quicksand of money scripts, and the structural tools like 529s and HSAs. It is a vast, interconnected, exhausting web of rules.
And the material acknowledges a profound truth. At a certain level of wealth, managing all of this simultaneously becomes a full-time job. The tax code changes, the estate laws vary, the market fluctuates. Which brings us to the final mechanism, calling in the cavalry, knowing how and when to hire professional help.
But hiring a financial advisor is a minefield because the terminology the industry uses is intentionally deceptive. Anyone can print a business card that says financial advisor or wealth manager. The material issues a massive flashing warning sign. You must understand the legal standard by which the advisor operates. You have to find a fiduciary. Explain the legal mechanics of this.
The distinction comes down to two different legal standards, the suitability standard and the fiduciary standard. An advisor operating under the suitability standard is essentially a broker or a salesperson. They are legally allowed to recommend a financial product to you as long as it is merely suitable for someone in your general demographic.
Suitable is an incredibly low bar.
It is. If you are 30 years old, it might be suitable for you to invest in a mutual fund. But that broker might recommend mutual fund A instead of mutual fund B, not because fund A is better for you, but because fund A pays the broker a massive hidden commission for selling it. They are prioritizing their own financial gain while technically fulfilling the legal requirement of suitability. It is an inherent conflict of interest.
So there are salesmen in nice suits. Now, contrast that with a fiduciary.
A fiduciary is legally, ethically, and strictly bound to act in your absolute best financial interest, putting your needs above their own compensation. If there are two identical investments and one pays them a commission while the other is cheaper for you, they are legally required to recommend the cheaper one. If they violate this trust, they could be stripped of their licenses and sued.
So if a fiduciary isn't making money by secretly skimming commissions off the products they sell me, how do they get paid?
Through transparent fee structures. The material outlines a few. Some charge a flat fee, perhaps $2,000, to build a comprehensive one-time financial plan. Some charge an hourly rate, like a lawyer. But the most common structure for ongoing wealth management is a percentage of assets under management, or AUM. Typically, they charge around 1% per year of the total money they manage for you.
So if they are managing $500,000 for you, they deduct $5,000 a year in fees. And the incentive structure there is completely aligned. If your portfolio grows to $600,000, they make more money. If the market crashes and you lose money, they lose money. They're sitting on the same side of the table as you.
Exactly. And the material strongly suggests looking for rigorous, standardized credentials to verify their expertise, specifically the CFP Certified Financial Planner, A CFP has undergone thousands of hours of study, passed comprehensive board exams on taxes, estate planning, and insurance, and is legally bound to act as a fiduciary.
It's the gold standard. So as we synthesize this immense deep dive, the overarching takeaway from our source material is that financial literacy is not a destination. You do not simply read a glossary of terms, pass a test, and declare yourself financially literate. It is a lifelong journey of adaptation.
Because the environment is hostile and ever-changing. The inflation rate changes, the tax brackets shift, your personal money scripts evolve. The material frames this entire endeavor, the act of sitting down and wrestling with these complex, boring, frustrating systems, as the ultimate act of investing in yourself.
It's about securing agency. When you understand the mechanism of a CD, the bank isn't a black box anymore. When you understand the vesting schedule of an option, your corporate job becomes a tool for your own wealth creation, rather than just a place you trade hours for dollars. If you don't take control of the math will absolutely take control of you.
Knowledge removes fear. When you master the vocabulary and the mechanics behind it, the financial world transitions from being an opaque threat to being a highly maneuverable toolset.
So, to everyone listening, navigating your own multi-million-dollar river of wealth, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time analyzing how our invisible childhood money scripts dictate our adult behavior. We talked about the friction of the taboo around money. Knowing that no one on earth will ever care more about your financial survival than you do, how are your own unconscious scripts quietly sabotaging the defensive structures you know you need? Is a deep subconscious fear of confronting mortality the real reason you keep putting off that meeting with an estate lawyer, leaving your dependents twisting in the wind? What is the one taboo conversation, whether it's demanding your actual market value from your boss or finally sitting down for a vulnerable money date with your partner, that you are terrified to initiate but absolutely must execute this week to take true ownership of your future? Identify the friction and break the script. We'll see you on the next deep dive.